Cool. Yeah, so go ahead and introduce yourself and your pronouns.
Okay. My name is Maygen Nicholson. I identify, or my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I identify as a queer or lesbian woman.
Awesome, thank you. And for those of y'all who don't know me, my name is Lucas. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I identify as a transgender boy.
Love it.
So, so I've been really enjoying following you. I think we've been following each other for a while, I think before you reached out to me. And I really enjoy your posts about your yoga practice and especially your dancing videos and some of the stuff you've shared with us. Do you mind telling us a little bit about your yoga practice and dancing and kind of what those mean to you?
Yeah, for sure. That's such a big question for me, like a lot contained within that. So I'll try to keep it short. But I was a dancer growing up and professional dancer in my young adulthood. And it definitely that was my practice for a long time. That was like my safe haven. Also being a queer kid, little girl growing up in Oklahoma, there was a lot going on internally, and dance seemed to be the only place where I felt safe and I felt like I got solace. And I was also in the dance spaces, like, queer and homophobia is not, transphobia is like not a thing. So it's really, for the most part, really safe space. So then, finding my way to yoga has been the same. It's the same feeling. It's just more spiritual for me, I would say. But then it's been interesting to bring that into my dancing as well. So now I have this deep connection to dance as almost like a prayer, and that's what resonates with me. But I've also used the yoga practice to help heal my trauma from religion around like being, queer and gay and not feeling accepted by God.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely been a full circle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. I can definitely see from your posts how much both of the practices help you. And it's really beautiful to see you moving and flowing with your body and feeling. I can just like see this sense of really groundedness in your body.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sure that's been a journey. I feel like it is for most queer and trans people.
Yeah.
Do you mind sharing about that a little bit? Like, was there ever a point in your life where you felt disembodied, or just really just disconnected from your body, and like telling us what that looked like?
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna get real deep real fast because it's just how I roll. But I was in a really toxic and abusive relationship for about 3 years. Um, it was my first relationship with another woman, and I completely lost myself in a sense that I developed a really heightened like anxiety disorder and had depression, and that really pulled me out of my body so much so that there are many months of my life that I don't remember at all
Whoa.
during that time. So I would say that was probably the biggest disembodiment that I have ever felt. And within that time, I had kind of, from being so disembodied and so out of it, I lost my dance career. I lost my sense of self. So when I finally got out of that relationship, I had to move back to Oklahoma for a while. And so the only way for me to be able to be there sanely I started taking yoga every day. I had already started my practice in LA, which is where I live, but I started practicing consistently at a studio in Oklahoma City. And I just started to notice how much better I felt being back in my body and my anxiety was really starting to calm and the depression was completely gone. And I just started to feel more like myself than I ever have. So then it was almost immediately that I did a teacher training, not necessarily with the intention of teaching, but just like, how is this practice, working this deeply, and what's this all about? And so that catapulted my journey with the practice, both as a student and as a teacher.
Okay. So it sounds like there's a big chunk of time in your life that you were so disembodied that it's almost like you blocked it out.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recall any of the symptoms from that time in your life? Like you mentioned anxiety and depression, but were there any other signs that you were feeling really disconnected or not attached to your body?
I mean, that's a hard question. I could feel like the physical sensations of it, which makes me sound like I was in my body, but it was, the heart racing or heart palpitations, the mind. I think so much of my energy was in my head, like in my mind, that I was up here constantly. And trying to like figure it all out. Like my brain just needed to figure things out. And it was like this constant like rumination and terror. And I think, that's a form of trauma. It's like, it's not safe for us to be in our bodies. So we leave our bodies. So I definitely dissociated, but it was very much like being in my head, so much so that I would wear myself out completely and just need to sleep for many, many hours. So, so I think that's what it felt like to me, was just a lot of mind spinning.
Yeah, so it sounds like you were like overly fatigued and also like really lost touch with these physical practices that were once really important to you, like dancing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was when did you become conscious that there was this disconnect, and like what was your catalyst for change? Like what pushed you towards coming to that healing journey?
I just wanted to like get my shiz together. There was like this urge to take responsibility for my life, and really learning the power that I contained within. But it was driven by, I had been so lost for so long that I just wanted to reclaim my life. And the wellness path just completely took me there. So as soon as I got a taste of it, there was no question that this was my path. And it just continues to evolve and evolve all the time, and constantly surprising me in the ways that it evolves. But yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like you were just tired of feeling lost, and it seems like there was definitely a sense of like something was off, especially because you had lost this practice of dancing that was so important to you.
Exactly. No, it was really hard to lose the dance. I wasn't really feeling connected to the industry, so it was a shift that needed to happen, but there was definitely, I grieved my relationship with dance for several years. It was really hard. And I, didn't even reconnect to it till recently, because there was a lot of healing that needed to happen around that time in my life that I associated with dance. So I've just recently gotten reconnected to it, but now it's just for the love of it. And is definitely more healing to me now than ever.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you made your way to your practices that have helped you come back home to yourself and your body. So yeah, how long have you been on that like a new plane of consciousness around your relationship with your body and being involved in your yoga and your dance practice again?
I will say it really kicked off in the beginning of 2014. That's whenever I went through the breakup and moved back to Oklahoma for a few months. And that really, urged me to start a consistent practice of mindfulness. And I had always been in therapy, like my whole life. I started therapy when I was about 20 years old, and I was in it on and off. But there was something about, trauma is stored in the body, and we know this now scientifically. So there's something about learning how to be with it in your body, and also using these practices to really let it move through your body, because there's only so much work we can do up here. So, integrating my therapy work with this embodiment practice was just like life altering. It was, everything I'd been looking for. So yeah, and now it's just about sharing that with, our community and anybody else who needs it.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a very similar experience with coming to my yoga practice after a really intense breakup and a very tumultuous relationship. And coming to yoga and therapy at the same time, and really needing to have that movement practice, like a conscious movement practice of letting emotions and stuff run through me and like run its course through my body. Because you're right, there is there is a lot of emotional energy that gets stored and locked into our bodies if we're not bringing attention to it and like moving those parts of our bodies to move that energy out.
Totally. And I think that, the embodiment practice is really learning how to be with those emotions, because the disembodiment happens whenever we are too scared to be with it, or it's literally unsafe, or whatever the case may be. But the practice of actually creating this safe space within to be with those feelings, however hard they may be, is such a powerful feeling that you have everything that you need within. And these practices really help you cultivate this deep relationship within that's almost like, my home practice. I feel like when I'm in my body and I'm in my practice, I feel like I'm at a studio receiving from a teacher, but it's just within me. So it's this really safe space that I can process things and lay it all down, and I can really take full responsibility for my life and for my well-being. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about this practice, is like really finding that power and that intuition and the love that's all contained within you.
Yeah, I really appreciate you speaking to that, because there's so many times where I've have tried to express like how empowering the practice has been for me, and especially during those times in my life, like especially as a queer and trans person trying to navigate our healthcare system, and then others like societal resources of support, and just how disempowered I was feeling around all of that, and how much yoga and my practice helped me feel empowered, because as you said, there's a way for us to have the courage to sit with these emotions and be able to meet them with love and compassion, even though they're like some of our darkest emotions to face. Yeah.
It's not easy, but the work is worth it.
No, it's not. So how do you feel now, as far as your embodiment, now that you've been practicing consistently for about 6 years?
I feel, let's see, I still struggle with an anxiety disorder. So it's interesting because it's not like the practice takes these things about us away. It rather teaches us how to be in relationship with it.
Yeah.
and so I feel, for the most part, I just feel more like myself than ever. And I'm connected to my soul and my spirit. But I'm still a human that has these human things. And for me in this lifetime, it's massive anxiety. And it's something that I may always have to navigate. And I always like to speak to that because I feel like people, when they start on this path or they've been on it for a while, it's easy to feel discouraged because there's parts of yourself that you wish could just go away, that these practices are supposed to take away. And it's not. It's just meant to learn how to be with it, how to really love it instead of pushing it away. So yeah, I would say, for the most part, I feel really great, embodied in spirit, and then I struggle being a human in the world still. Yeah. And I also think it's important for us, like as facilitators, to speak to that so our students know that we too are human, and that we're all in this journey together. So that creates like a safety, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely, yeah, I mean, the whole point is not to push away parts of you or shove these things down that are just who you are, and instead being able to appreciate them, and accept them for what they are and meet them with love. So it's really nice to hear that your practices with movement can do that for you.
Yeah.
I'm also curious to know, has your dancing changed, and like your relationship to dancing and your body, has it changed since before you found yoga to now?
Yeah, like I spoke to briefly before, it's changed completely. Mainly because within the industry, at least the part of the dance industry I was a part of, I lost my passion for dance because it became about every dance class I was going to, I had to make sure I was front and center so the teacher could see me because they were probably going to choreograph something soon if they weren't already, and then I needed to get the job, and just all this stuff that did not feel aligned with my soul. So dance to me in that sense became really superficial. And then after, after I broke up with the dance industry and found yoga, and then kind of I'm still in the process of coming back into my dance practice. It's interesting. One of my teachers, her name is Adriana Rizzolo. She is a practitioner and a teacher of Bhakti yoga, and part of her practices and what she teaches is dancing. So when I found her, I just fell in love with her and her heart and everything that she offered. And then I took a training, and then it was like there was a daily dance practice, and I had so much resistance to it at first. And then as I got more and more into it, I was like, oh, this is what it was for me all along. Back when I was like a kid, it was like this space to express and to let things move through me. And to dance now without worrying about what it looks like or having to look cool or like I'm good. Yeah, it's completely changed tenfold for sure. And now I know that literally anybody can dance, So before I was in this world where it was like you had to be training, for 25 years before you stepped into these classes, where now I'm in spaces where everybody's just expressing, and that's the most important thing. So that feels really, really good.
Yeah. I was definitely curious to see if your confidence levels with your dancing and just being able to be more present with the experience has changed since you started doing yoga, which it sounds like it has.
Yes,
That is something.
185%.
Yeah, I definitely have never considered myself a good dancer by any means, but I definitely feel since I've found yoga that my dance has also become like a devotional practice for me. Even just honoring my body and what it can do for me and showing it some love through my dance and letting it move and letting it um, just move things through me and out of me. Has made it a much more devotional practice, and I don't feel like I would have that consciousness around it if I wasn't also practicing yoga and like studying the philosophies of it, you know.
Yeah.
So I do feel a lot more confident in my dancing, and I think it looks better, but maybe it doesn't. It feels
It doesn't
better.
even matter. That's all that matters. As long as it feels better, feels good, that's
Yeah.
it. That's all that
Yeah.
matters.
Yeah, so you've kind of have touched on like your spiritual practice and how it's been affected by um, your yoga and dance. But do you want to talk about it a little bit more? It sounds like you're doing bhakti yoga, which is a form of devotional yoga through dance and movement and singing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I practice a lot of bhakti yoga. So it's a lot of chanting, mantra work, and I study spiritual texts, or the specifically the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which is definitely a spiritual practice. Um, Journaling, asana, which is the posture part of the practice that America knows to be yoga. Um, I've started really incorporating all these different parts of yoga to make like more well-rounded practice, or yeah, to really and learning that my practice can look different every day based on what I need. And that's been really freeing to really honor that and to learn like all these different aspects of the practice. So daily I can honor what I need and not just asana, which I have a lot to say about that.
Right.
Yeah, I went through a really bad, like I got a lot of injuries from the practice like recently. And I was in PT for pretty extensively for about 3 months. And my body just, I mean, I couldn't even dance. My body was in so much pain. I had like shoulder issues on both ends. I had like a disc issue in my neck, something in my lower back, something in my hip. I mean, it was just everywhere. So I was kind of forced to really start diving into the other aspects of the yoga practice because I literally couldn't move my body. So I'm really grateful for that. And learning how to be embodied in a way that isn't movement, you know, and it's also helped me to be able to offer that to people as other ways of practicing. So, yeah.
Yeah. I know that you were saying that you like had some acceptance to come to around some religious trauma that you had growing up, and being queer. How has how like was that ever something like I know that it was religious, but was it spiritual back then? And have you come back to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've always been really spiritual, but I didn't have words for it, or couldn't really put it into context. But I noticed like my first inkling that I had a weird or something like some trauma around God was I tried to read the Course in Miracles, and it's so God heavy, all the wording, which you can translate into whatever, you deem to be the higher power that resonates with you or that you believe in. But I was so triggered by it and I couldn't read it. And so I started to really, dive into that and to sit with that. And that's when I found one of my teachers I spoke about earlier, Adriana, and she's so, devoted. It's the devotional, bhakti is devotional practice to God, so through practice with her, she really helped me start to learn how I can heal that trauma. And it wasn't like, my family wasn't really religious. It was mainly that I grew up in a society where I was constantly hearing that if I was gay, I was going to hell. So to me, I learned that God was this, man in the sky that was really rude and that hated lots of people. And that just didn't make sense to me. And I was like, if that's who God is or what God is, I don't want any part of that being, So, and I would say that was a deep wound for me, and it's still taking me, I'm still in the process of healing that. And still like figuring out what I believe. But I will say I can feel a connection a lot deeper than I used to. And I can say God without cringing. So I think some progress is being made.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
So I want to get into some of the work that you're doing around decolonizing yoga, but just real quick, do you mind describing just a little bit about like how one might express devotion to God through dancing or chanting and movement?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, through movement, I don't know. I feel like if you have a hard time connecting to God as like an ultimate power, you could even just like dance for the love of yourself, because we are God energy. Animals are God energy. Plants are God energy, So if it's hard for you, I mean, I think that's a really prevalent point for our community. If it's hard for you to connect with that higher power, you feel it's true for you that you have trauma around it. Finding the love within is a really great place to start. So, like moving your body and really learning to love all parts of yourself is a devotion. So I think that's always a really, really good place to start.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate
You're
that.
welcome. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And also when I am doing my movement practices, such as dancing or yoga, I know that there is this higher energy, this like soul of the universe that's acting upon me to allow me to dance and move and express myself like that. So even just knowing that and really letting it flow through me, and I'm more or less surrendering to it and not resisting it, it for me is a way of like expressing that devotion to our like our universal source.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's powerful.
Yeah. So I know that you're doing a lot of work with decolonizing yoga and just making more queer centered and affirming spaces within your yoga teachings. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So I'm in the process of, there's, two different things. Trying to build spaces that are more inclusive, which will create diversity. But then also within that, decolonizing the yoga practice. So there's so much to be said about both. But I'll speak to, I've been teaching LGBTQ focused classes and events for about 4 years now. And I've just from hearing different people's experiences going into these public classes, there's a lot of, microaggressions that can happen or little things that, a lot of people in our community just don't feel safe with. So there's something really special about having like a yoga or a mindfulness space that's devoted just to our community, because you walk through the door and you immediately know that you don't have to explain yourself. Most likely everybody will ask you your pronouns and honor it as they ask you your name. And you don't have to, worry about if you're, going to be looked at weird or, all eyes on you, or you're going to be the one oddball in the room, you know, that you're in a safe space where everybody gets it. So
Right.
then there's this, it becomes so powerful, the amount of healing that can happen in that container.
Right.
So yeah, and I'm kind of grappling with, you know, I do have students that have been with me for a long time in my LGBTQ classes that then come to other events that I open up to everybody, or my other classes that are open to everybody. So it's interesting, you know, really figuring out how to merge our community with the world at large. But I think the queer and LGBTQ plus focused spaces are so important.
Right.
So that's, you know, more and more that's opening up to me, and becoming more and more important to me. So there's that. And then, you know, this is a more recent thing for me, but I've, through this work of studying, you know, what inclusivity actually means, come to find out America has stolen a practice, the yoga practice from India, and profited up on it, but we're not really, for the most part, doing actual yoga. So then there's a lot of hurt that's being done, a lot of harm, because it's appropriation. So, and then there's lots of other kinds of appropriation within the yoga spaces, using sage and Palo Santo, and taking these indigenous practices, and then misusing mantras, displaying deities. There's so many things that, you know, if we want to talk about inclusivity, and especially I think it's really important because what I love about I love so many things about our community, but we are everybody. And so if you want to make a really safe space for everybody in the queer LGBTQ plus community, decolonization is huge. Because if you have a Native American or somebody who identifies as indigenous coming into the room, and you're using, you know, their indigenous practices, but you didn't adopt, it wasn't given to you, or you didn't get permission, or you don't even know why you're using it, then that causes harm. So,
Yeah.
you know, it really is it's a wormhole, and it's a lot of things to process and think about. And I'm actually in a mentorship now with a woman of color named Eliana Chinia. You should follow her if this stuff interests you. She's amazing. But
She was just in that article of 20 yogis of color to watch out for in 2020.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, she is to be watched out for. She is a force. But I'm, you know, really working on breaking down, you know, there's also within anti-racism work and everything that, yeah, I mean, it's a lot to talk about. It's a lot to unpack, but
Yeah, definitely.
it's really important to me, especially because I'm wanting to make sure that the LGBTQ plus spaces that I hold are practicing inclusivity and creating diversity. Because like I said, we are everybody. So, you know, it's important. The work is really important.
Well, yeah, I definitely agree. So, like, one of my favorite quotes is, in like the anti-oppression work that I do, is no one is free while other people are oppressed. And so if you take the most marginalized of the most marginalized communities, which would be a queer and trans person of color, because queer and trans people are marginalized within the LGBTQ community, and then people of color are marginalized within the LGBTQ community, and then trans people are marginalized within people of color communities, which is already a community that's marginal. You know what I'm saying? So it's a very marginalized, it's like, it is the most marginalized of the most marginalized. And if you can make a space that's safe for them, it then becomes a space that should be safe for everybody.
Exactly. But it
and
doesn't come without doing this work of
doing the work.
really becoming aware. And I mean, and the work of what are the biases that you hold, and what beliefs do you hold that are holding you back from really being able to honor fully each
Right.
and every being. So yeah.
There definitely comes a lot of work with learning to be humble with the privileges that you might have, accepting them, and being able to like really hold a critical lens to yourself, and being able to acknowledge where your privilege comes from, and to like I guess really analyze like the sources or the areas of your life where you might be perpetuating harm, or subscribing to systems that are harmful. Like one of the things that you were saying is like lighting Palo Santo in the room and like not even knowing where it comes from or why you're doing it. It's really funny because my partner was just showing me this post of somebody getting a Thai Sakya tattoo, and I'm half Thai, and a part of me like immediately felt like it's hard to explain. Like there was definitely like a tightness that I felt in my chest, and a little bit of like this feeling that like my space was being like broken into, kind of.
Yeah.
And so my first question was like, does this person practice Buddhism or any sort of like Eastern philosophies? And my partner was skeptical, and that hurts me, like,
Yeah.
because like I wouldn't mind that people are taking a part in these practices as long as they knew why they were doing it, and also really standing by the philosophies that they represent, and using their privilege to stand up for the communities that they're taking practices from or
Yeah.
sharing practices with.
Yeah. Thank
Um,
you. Thank you for sharing that. It's, not people of color's job to share, your like hurt and pains that the wide society has caused. So thank you for sharing that. And it's also important for people to hear that and to honor that, because your story is very prevalent in the world, and people, that feeling that you felt in that moment, most people of color and people that identify as LGBTQ plus experience that feeling on some level each and every day, sometimes multiple times a day.
right,
So, and some, and then some people of color are literally wake up fearing fearing for their lives, which is a valid fear. So
definitely
yeah,
how I felt as a trans person of color living in Birmingham for the first year or so. I
yes.
like the first couple weeks that I was living there, like every time someone knocked on my door, I was like, "Oh my God, someone followed me home. They're coming to get me."
Yeah. Oh,
Which is like it's silly, but it's a real fear.
it's not silly. It's a valid fear. And I mean, wow. Yeah, it's really good for
Um,
people to hear that. So, this is why it's so important to do this work. Like the less you can cause harm, the better. And it takes time, and it takes practice, and it takes people calling you out. But
right,
you being humble and listening and shifting your ways, So, yeah.
right, yeah, and touching back on like one of the first things that you said is like I've been practicing yoga for a while, and I have not been somebody who is has ever let the fear um, of being misgendered or not feeling safe, something that stopped me from coming to my yoga practice. Like I've
Hmm.
always felt very like more or less entitled or like deserving to be there. So I can pretty easily walk into most yoga spaces feeling pretty confident, but I know that's not the story for a lot of queer and trans people, and that doesn't go without saying that I do have this kind of like tiptoeing feeling when I do come into a space, and that feeling of almost on defense of like, when is somebody going to say something or do something that is going to, like misgender me or say something insensitive or harmful about either communities of color or the LGBTQ community, and then feeling like just feeling really hurt by it and taking on my practice, because I mean that has happened a lot. So that
Yeah.
feeling is there every time I go into a space that isn't LGBTQ centered, and luckily I don't let it stop me, but I definitely can understand how that would be a real barrier for a lot of people getting to their practice. So I just wanted to reiterate the importance of why we are doing the work to create LGBTQ centered affirming
Yeah,
spaces.
totally. And there are studio and spaces that are doing the work of, all things social justice and really embodying inclusivity and decolonization work, but it's going to take time.
Right,
And so in the meantime and forevermore, because we deserve it, we can create these spaces, safe spaces for ourselves. We don't have to wait for these spaces to mold to what we need it to be. We can just create our own. We have the power to do so. So yeah, and I will say that I, have seen the power of these LGBTQ plus focused spaces doing this kind of work for, almost 4 years now. I mean, there's nothing like it. It's really
right,
special, and our community deserves we have a birthright to wellness, but we either don't feel safe or we don't feel worthy of wellness because we live in a society that tells us we don't. There's so many barriers to just showing up. But if you know that you're going to be well received and welcomed, and that you're not going to have to explain yourself or worried about being misgendered, that takes away a lot of those,
social barriers.
the barriers that keep people from claiming, these practices that are their birthright.
Right.
So, yeah.
And talking about all these means of creating these safe spaces, it is important to recognize how people can feel unsafe, and whether you're somebody who is creating that harm or not, just recognizing that feeling of unsafety and how that's going to inhibit somebody from their healing process. So these practices that we're trying to provide for people that are meant to be for their healing and for their wellness, that healing isn't going to happen unless they feel safe.
Exactly. Because people
So,
show up into these spaces, and in the space they're supposed to find healing, they then receive more trauma. So
right,
it's a huge issue.
right,
And so I'm a huge believer in spaces that are, strictly for POC, strictly for people who identify as Black, strictly for LGBTQ plus people. Like, these spaces are really important for
right.
our healing, for our
Yeah.
collective healing. Yeah.
Yeah. So before we wrap this up, I do want to also um, just touch a little bit about how we're talking about how there are these studios who are doing the work, and there is some progression happening. And we were talking a little bit about merging these LGBTQ spaces into the general public yoga spaces. And so I do really hope that with your work and my work and the work of a lot of other people like us, that we're giving our community the tools that they need in order to feel safe and empowered, and to be more willing to enter into these spaces, and at the same time be educating folks, and also, I guess, empowering them to educate themselves on how to create less harm and do better.
Yes.
And so I
Yes.
do really hope that within a few years, at some point down the line, that these communities will merge and be able to share healing spaces together.
Yeah. Absolutely. I hope that too. But in the meantime, we're going to be rocking our own spaces. It's going to be amazing. But I will
Right.
say that, any yoga teachers that are on this now or see this later, if this work is something that's new to you or you don't have the proper resources, you don't really know where to start, reach out to Leucas or I, and we'll be happy to give you resources and people to follow and where to begin.
Yeah, thank you. So thanks for doing this video with me. If you aren't following Maygen Nicholson, please do. There's a post with her in my stories, so you can get to her profile from there. And also, if you're in LA, you can go practice with her.
Yes, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, Lucas. This was wonderful.
Yeah, that's really nice. Thank you. Thank you for everything that you shared with me and everybody who's been watching.
Yeah, and thank you for creating the space. And I'll be talking to you.
Yeah, definitely.
Alrighty, have a beautiful night. Bye, everybody. Bye.